today in America. I don't know about you, but to me, things feel pretty chaotic and upsetting and really kind of make me mad. Anybody else feel that way? Makes you want to do something, doesn't it? The time that we're remembering this morning, back in the 60s and the 70s, it felt like that too. There were things happening in this country that, as people became more and more awakened, more and more aware, I think based in the awakening that we had been challenged to engage in after the Second World War and the Holocaust. The principle, the divine principle that all humans have great worth. All humans express spirit. All humans are love. So after that awakening, then the racially incited murders and crimes that took place fairly regularly. They were in the news all the time back in the 50s and the 60s and even the 70s. Few of you remember, I see a couple of heads nodding. Evolution, conscious evolution, was continuing. And today, we're celebrating the heroes of a movement that produced change in our country, in the laws of our country, in not yet in down to the bottom of all the hearts and minds in our country, and we know that, and that continues to irritate us. But there was a lot of progress made during the civil rights movement. And the people, especially Martin Luther King Jr., whom we're celebrating today, were powerful instruments in making that happen. After listening to Oprah Winfrey at the Golden Globes Awards, responding to, giving voice to the Me Too movement, another kind of delusion that some people have entertained, that women are not equal human beings. That's another one. It's kind of like the golden calves of Western civilization are popping up and getting knocked down, and more are coming. Can anybody figure out from what Trump is doing what the next movement is going to have to be? Immigrants is certainly, immigrants and minorities in general. It's broadening. And wealth, the poor. Those are coming up, coming down the pike. And the reason I say that is that after discussing with my wife after the Golden Globes, Oprah's talk, and telling her, okay, so next Sunday is going to be close to Martin Luther King Day, she presented me. She disappeared and came back downstairs and presented me with a pile of books. And I looked and went, oh my God. Writings of Martin Luther King, a huge tome on African American women from the civil rights era. And I thought about it and I thought, okay, thank you, Spirit. Went to work. It was wonderful. I learned two very important for us things about the success of the civil rights movement. One was, we remember the heroes, but the heroes opened the gates at the right moment for a deep and wide flood of support that had built up behind the scenes in the hearts and minds of millions. And the second thing, which I'll get to after a bit, was that we think of Martin Luther King as a Baptist minister. And I was reading some of his writings. Surprise. So let's think first of all about the flood. In 1959, Rosa Parks, what'd she do? She was on the bus, yeah. Right. What did she do on the bus? Everybody said something different, so I couldn't hear.
Wouldn't give up her seat to a white man.
Wouldn't give up her seat in the front of the bus. She wouldn't go sit where the black folks were supposed to sit. She just stayed there. Now, I don't know about you, but I perceived this as a story about a poor, oppressed African-American domestic worker who one day decided, enough. And in reading that book about African-American women, I discovered a different story. Rosa Parks had grown up in Montgomery, Alabama, and she was very aware of the civil rights violations, mainly because the white kids got to ride the bus to school, and the black kids didn't. Different school, unequal school, and they had to walk while the white kids rode by them. She was tuned in pretty early. The husband that she married was a civil rights worker, a person who was very active in the Montgomery chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which we generally abbreviate as NAACP. And Rosa joined him in that chapter. So for about 20 years, she was the secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP. They sent her to activism school. They trained her as an activist. They funded her education. She became the primary investigator of several black atrocities, several murders, and provided the information to the NAACP lawyers so they could prosecute these people. Rosa Parks was quite a force. And people all over the South, African Americans, were starting to do the bus protest, and several of them had already and been arrested. And so NAACP said to themselves, okay, this is our chance. So they coached Rosa. She was the case that they were prepared to bring to the Supreme Court. So she committed that act of civil disobedience in full knowledge that she was starting something big to, get those laws of all about civil separation off the books. The drinking fountains, anything urban. The cause was to wipe out the segregation laws, to change the laws. And it wasn't just Rosa Parks that made the difference. Yes, the NAACP started to defend her after her arrest. The NAACP across the South had also organized African Americans to boycott city buses across the South. For months after Rosa Parks' act of civil disobedience, Southern buses ran empty nobody was riding the buses, which had mainly been ridden by African Americans. They were gone. What made that possible? People still had to go to work. People still had to deal with inclement weather. White businessmen who had domestic employees, guess what? They got drafted to go give a ride to their employees, to pick them up at home and bring them back home every day. Organizations and churches all over, of all stripes and all colors, led massive fundraising drives so that African American taxis, some of which I'm sure would fall today in the category of Uber, were able to transport African American riders and only charge bus fare. And because there was this swelling, this upswelling of support on the part of people, anonymous people, that action by Rosa Parks declenched, set off a stream, a flood of, okay, these laws got to change now, and we're supporting them. And they did. Now, was that the end? Obviously not. We're still working on this one. We're still working on all of them. But it was a big shift. So now we've got women projected into common awareness. Like I say, this is still a process going on. And we, as individuals and as members of community and spiritual organizations, we are the conscience. We are the people. We are the hearts and minds and the love that needs to build so that when the next spokesperson emerges, we don't know who it's going to be, but it will happen. It is the direction of the evolution of consciousness so that we can be part of the action at the moment when it will count. So our work on building spiritual awareness, on practicing divine principles, is an essential basis for making this evolution succeed, wave by wave by wave. It's not going to go backwards. Consciousness does not evolve backwards. It can only go forward. It's a divine principle. It's a law. It only works that way. So then I started reading different texts penned by Martin Luther King Jr. Wow. First one I came across. He said, why don't I just bring a page of quotes? I can tell you approximately the words, but I want to tell you what he really said. Okay, quote. Listen to this closely. Where is he coming from? What is he saying? I am convinced that the universe, interesting word, is under the control of a loving purpose, and that in the struggle for righteousness, humans have a cosmic companion behind the harsh appearance of the world is a benign power. End quote. Does that sound familiar at all? Did we just say that this morning?
Yeah.
Essentially? Interesting. The awareness from which Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was working. Universal, interspiritual, new thought, awareness. And it's the awareness that is the fount of energy for actions. You may know that in 1959, Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife Coretta traveled to India, specifically to study Mahatma Gandhi's teachings on nonviolent social action. They were supported deeply by the Friends Service Committee, which co-sponsored their trip and arranged for Gandhi and King to have some significant time together so that King was able to essentially study at Gandhi's feet over time, over days. These encounters appear to have deeply influenced King's awareness. For one thing, he became convinced that nonviolent resistance was the highest and best method for bringing about lasting social change. Now think about resistance. What it involves thinking, what it involves doing. You can do it a number of ways, and it all depends on your consciousness, your awareness. Often, protests, demonstrations, focus on what we don't want. No more, right? That is not nonviolent protest. Can you see why? Somebody give me an idea why?
It's violence itself.
Yeah.
It's in opposition to something.
The oppositional thinking.
It puts
Is-
energy into what you're opposed to.
What?
It puts energy into what you're opposing.
Beautifully said. It puts energy into what you're opposed to. What do we know about our thoughts?
They become reality.
They become our reality. So we spend time, we put energy into, not that, not that, not that, not that. What do you think we see? Exactly. So that was a major awareness. Nonviolent protest focuses on what we want to see happen, based on the same principle, based on the same divine law. What we focus on happens. We experience it. Not perhaps quite like that, sometimes like that, but we experience it. It happens. So think in that context of the incredible power of millions of people focusing on love, focusing on justice, focusing on kindness. You got the picture? Wow. Bombshell. Nonviolent bombs. So King became really convinced, speaking with Gandhi, that Gandhi was onto something important. And when he came back, he taught that to his followers. King did. He spread the word of universal, interspiritual laws and principles. At the end of his trip, he wrote, quote, Gandhi embodies in his life certain universal principles that are as inescapable as the law of gravity. Sound familiar? You know a few of those? Inescapable principles? Can anyone name one?
Law of attraction.
What?
Law of attraction.
The law of attraction, okay.
Law of circulation,
Law of circulation,
law of mind action.
the one that covers everything. The law of mind action, which we just said a couple of minutes ago. What we think becomes our reality. There's no person there saying, oh, this time I'll let it work. I won't let it work for them. There's nobody there doing that. It's the way the universe works. It's a law. In 1976, the college, the public college where I was teaching, fired me for being willing to become the faculty sponsor for the Black Students Association. Way. Because once they had a faculty sponsor, rules allowed them to speak up and to demonstrate on campus. There were 5 of us who stood up as faculty sponsors. And the next June, we all lost our contracts. That was in the 70s. 40-some years later, now in 2018, I am so happy and so grateful to hold a leadership position in an organization that won't fire me for standing up for justice. Think about that difference. I am so grateful that awareness has moved forward that much, that I can belong openly to an organization that of people who are practicing to be the multitude that supports the cause of justice and freedom and fairness today in our country, in our world. I thank you all for being part of that organization. You're very important to me in that context and in others. And so I want to end with the knowledge, the thought, sharing the thought that we, as we are, we anonymous proponents of justice, are the force that is helping to make our world more loving, more peaceable, more spiritually aware. And as we commit to that shared vision of oneness, Let's all say, thank you, God. For all the blessings we experience today in our lives. And so it is.